folks on our panel that have joined in with us. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through another, welcome again and let you know my name, if you've just joined us, is Heather Dye. I'm here in the Adult and Graduate Admissions Office, and I'm here to help facilitate this conversation so that you can learn the most alongside us. This is our second Forrester Forum. We've established this forum so that we can network in the community in a time where social distancing has created a different level of communication. And today our topic will focus on grief and loss, again led by Dr. Mandy Baraka, who will give us some input and insight on how our students as well as mental health counselors are learning to help clients. Our guests will be muted again. Please use the chat feature. Welcome, Jill, so that you can talk amongst each other there. And as you go through this discussion, we'll ask for some questions. So feel free to use the chat to ask questions that come up along the way. So as we get started, grab your coffee and join us. And now please welcome Dr. Mandy Baraka.
Thanks, Heather. I want to give a caveat. It looks like the earth is crying outside and the storms are here. So if for some reason my internet cuts out, I will be back. But panelists, you may get to jump in and have a conversation before that. I've not had trouble yet, but it's a pretty big storm, which is also very well connected with our topic today of grief and loss. My name is Mandy Baraka. And as Heather said, we are going to talk today about kind of navigating typical losses in the I'm unmuted. Can you hear me? Okay. We're going to talk about navigating normal kind of events and the losses of those events in this coronavirus season. I lived 10 years in South Asia working with missionary families and other families that lived abroad, working with children who are identified as third culture kids. It alerted me to the kind of life with frequent transitions that prompted a lot of loss, a lot of goodbyes. And traditionally, for those of us who maybe live in one location for an extended length of time, a lot of times the losses that we think of generally relate only to death of loved ones. But for third culture kids, there are numerous losses, both in the moment, the loss of moving and leaving friends and never being able to see them again, to anticipatory losses of knowing that things will change. And that really alerted me to the importance of recognizing the kinds of losses that are part of our everyday lives that maybe we don't acknowledge or just give credit to and allow ourselves to grieve. And so that has prompted me to be very intentional in my own life and in the work that I do with clients to identify and help clients walk through those. So I'm excited to be able to hear from our colleagues who also sit with clients in different stages. But before we dive into that conversation of how counselors do work with clients and hear some examples, I thought it might be helpful to have a reminder of the kind of loss that we're talking about. I'm going to share some slides. Oh, I don't think I can.
If you can hear me, I'm not hearing you quite well. Is everyone else hearing Dr. Baraka okay today, this morning? Yep, John's okay, Marley's okay. That's good. I'm not hearing all of that, so I apologize. We'll jump in here or there.
So I'm going to share my screen. So the global, I'll talk a little bit louder, Heather, if that helps. The global coronavirus pandemic has created a new reality, a reality that's marked by grief and loss. Over the last few months, we have had weddings canceled, concerts canceled, numerous meetings, travel plans, major school events such as proms and now graduations, both previously occurring and upcoming graduations canceled. More and more has been and will continue to be canceled in the wake of the virus. It's important for us to recognize this will continue to happen as we are forced to navigate both individual and collective grief in the face of an uncertain future, one that we really do not have. We do not have control, and we are powerless to control. David Kessler, one of the creators of the stages of grief model, said to Brene Brown in an interview, "We are all dealing with the collective loss of the world we knew." And that is true. There are numerous layers of loss that we are experiencing. And the disruptions of these normal routines and rhythms of daily life are contributing to a lingering unease and sadness about the way we are all feeling. The way things were 4 weeks ago are different from the ways that we are now responding to the pandemic. Not only are we mourning from thousands and thousands of lives lost due to the coronavirus, we're also mourning the loss of normalcy from seeing coworkers on screens just like this instead of working face to face, from seeing colleagues and classmates in a shared classroom, from working with our clients in our offices and going to this kind of format for most of our outside the home events. Maybe we previously took these for granted, but they need to be recognized. I'm grateful for technology that allows us to connect, but I do miss the ability to be with colleagues and friends with whom I prior spent time. So grief is traditionally connected with death and associated with death, but it can follow any type of loss. And that's what we're talking about this morning. For example, people are very easy and willing to connect grief and the experience of grief after divorce or job loss. But some of the things that we are experiencing, in addition to the death of many loved ones as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, include job loss and financial insecurity, worry and anxiety heightened about the safety of loved ones. The sheer act of being quarantined can create some isolation and anxiety there. Changes in daily habits and routines, the losses of special events. And I named a list before, but it's endless. Weddings, graduations, birthday parties, anniversaries, and fear of the future. Not only are we dealing with the loss of in the moment, but also with anticipatory grief. I have read over the last week on social media numerous blogs written by friends of mine who have upcoming weddings, who have talked about, we were supposed to be planning and cake tasting right now, and yet I don't even know if we will be able to have our wedding in the same venue. We may be in our backyard. I've also, realized that the deadlines that people are pushing back are creating additional grief of the longing to want to celebrate something, but also putting that on hold. So as we think about the kinds of sadness that we can experience through this type of grief, um, we also may continue to experience fear about what will happen, anger over the situation, and continued feelings of isolation and loneliness. In the backdrop of COVID-19, fear about the short term and the long term can really contribute to these fears of anxiety, and the feelings of grief. It's important to remember that grief is a normal reaction to loss. And as my colleagues will attest soon, we all experience grief at some point in our lives. And while we may not expect feelings of shock or numbness or sadness, being connected to things such as the cancellation of event, we know that it may just surprise us and arise from nowhere. The signs may be less clear in this season, but they are there. So some of these things that may be actual contributors to grief that go unnoticed are trouble focusing on normal tasks, sleeping more or less, or in an irregular sleep schedule, waking up in the middle of the night, anger or irritability, somatic symptoms such as headaches or stomach ache, having low energy, or the inability to get up and get going, re-experiencing past grief and thinking about prior experiences where you felt the same way or similarly, and poor use of coping skills. I would not be surprised if the online shopping bills for many people who are able to do so have not increased significantly out of an anxiety purchase and in the desire to decrease that in some way. The good news is that we as people and the way that God created us, we do tend to be resilient in the face of grief. Once the immediate sting or the immediate crisis of the grief has passed, general people, are usually able to come to a place of acceptance and recognizing a new normal, where we adapt to what has happened and learn to live, finding ways to cope with the loss. And in a world that really does seem turned upside down, we may not experience grief the same way as we might have under normal circumstances. What I'd like to encourage all of us to remember is that grief is personal and everyone does experience it differently. No matter the loss that is experienced, it's important for us to remember that our feelings are valid. And this is something that we do with our clients, reminding them that their feelings are valid and they're not alone in that emotion. If you're not sure, or things that we do with clients to help deal with grief include taking care of yourself, right? It may seem in some ways like a monumental task. I remember the first few weeks of quarantine or stay-at-home order. There were memes on social media where it was, making fun of the fact that everyone had a home uniform of a house robe, sweatpants, disheveled hair. That, for a time, can be very healthy, but being able to make sure that you're eating good food, staying hydrated, getting enough rest, doesn't fix everything, but it gives enough physical bandwidth to withstand the waves of the emotions. Don't put too much pressure to maintain a normal routine, because life, especially right now, is not normal. Giving time to not feel rushed through the process. We will, in our own lives and working with clients, we will find a space of acceptance to a new normal, but being able to give the space to work towards that may take a lot longer than is expected. There's no right or wrong way to feel after loss. For many, especially as I've talked with younger individuals looking towards a graduation, denial, nope, it's going to happen, it's going to happen, has been a main decision to avoid feeling that pain. And so the shock and disbelief when things have been canceled follow by a sense of numbness and anger. It is almost surreal for some individuals in this season of loss of many events. The familiar stages of grief, and I'll share them, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler, which are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. They're listed as stages, but they really aren't considered to be approached in a linear fashion. Grief is very much like the waves. They may come crashing in much stronger at some times. They may be just a slow hit. Nonetheless, you'll get wet. It's not a sequential timeline. And we, as humans, and all humans experiencing grief, may go back and forth or combine some of these emotions. H. Norman Wright, who is an expert on grief, says that there's no cookie cutter for grief. And I think that's right. Each person does navigate and work through their grief in the ways that they can. The important thing, and this is kind of where we want to make connections with our panelists. The important thing is to give time to yourself, if you're the one working through the grief, to others, if and as they work through their grief, to work through the emotions at their own pace. It does, as I've said several times now, take time to integrate those losses into a new normal. But it's especially true when, in addition to the loss of events, normal life has also been disrupted. Even if we or our clients have not personally experienced a death related to the pandemic, it's important to not dismiss the feeling. It's important to not engage in a comparison of losses. I have a dear friend whose family has been hit very hard by COVID-19 and has lost several family members due to the virus. And she asked me the other day if my family was okay. And I said, yes, everyone is healthy. And she said, I need to hear that because I need to be reminded that our experience is not everyone's experience. And I said, and we need to be reminded that our experience is not the only experience as well. And so having a shared approach and ability to grieve with those that grieve and not dismiss our own areas of grieving is important. So as we think about grief and in this season, it is important to reach out when we can. Reach out to those that we love, friends and family, and realize that reaching out for professional mental health is also a possibility in a similar format as we're using today. We are grateful for the ability to transfer to telemental health to be able to continue to provide services. COVID-19 may rob us of our ability to connect with people in a physical space, in a physical distancing of sort, but we still can create social connection, and we still can maintain emotional connection to those we love and grieve together. So, Yeah, I think that sets us up well to perhaps hear from our panelists a little more. And Heather, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, all right. We're going to transition to our panelists at this point in time. And first, we're going to start with Kelsey Herber here with us today. Kelsey, can you start by telling us a bit about yourself, how you as a counseling alumna and as well as coach are working through this current time that we're in?
Absolutely. So, as Heather said, I am a coach. So, I'm the head volleyball coach at Huntington University, as well as one of our therapists in our counseling services office. I'm so thankful to work at a university where we're able to offer counseling to our students for free. And so, I am honored to be one of those therapists and work with our students in that capacity as well. Um, I graduated from Huntington University in 2016 with a degree in broadcasting and a minor in psychology. Thought I was going to go on to potentially be a news anchor, and then quickly realized one day that I don't watch the news very much. And so I didn't know what made me think that I was going to do that as a career every day of my life, if that wasn't necessarily something that I personally felt a strong sense of passion. And so that's when I decided to enroll in Huntington University's graduate counseling program. I worked in HU's admissions office during that time in undergrad and graduate. Was an assistant volleyball coach since I had played volleyball for 4 years at HU. And then once I graduated with my master's in counseling in 2019, I also transitioned into being the head coach here at HU for the volleyball team, as well as counseling in our counseling services, like I said. And this has been quite the transition for sure for me. I tend to be extroverted, and I like to be busy, and I like to be meeting with people and going from thing to thing. And so all of a sudden to have all of that take place at home and to not have that face-to-face interaction has been difficult. And I've told many people that the hardest part in all of this for me personally has been not having my girls on campus anymore, not having my team here. Because we were right in the middle of our spring season, seeing each other almost every day, practicing, working out, doing small groups, preparing for a missions trip in August that got postponed. And so to all of a sudden have them all leave campus and know that it might be a while before I see them in person again has been really tough.
Thanks, Kelsey. How do you see um, your own grief and loss kind of being part of what allows you to connect with others in this season?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I definitely have experienced that grief as well. And specifically just surrounding how there's just so much change and what my day-to-day life looked like now looks a lot different. And while I'm so grateful to know that myself and my loved ones are healthy, to know that there hasn't been a job loss, for me or my husband personally, I'm so thankful for those things. But the reality is there's been a lot of loss just in different ways. And so to all of a sudden not have the second half of our spring season, to have that missions trip postponed, like I said, to know that all summer activities are canceled and that there's even the potential for our season in the fall to look different. Those have definitely been things that I myself am in the process of grieving. And I think knowing that I'm going through my own grief has helped me be able to be present with my students who I work with in counseling, as well as my players too, because I can confidently tell them you're not alone in this, and that sadness and anxiety that you're feeling, that deep sense of loss that you're experiencing, I can confidently tell them they're not alone in it because I myself am in that place. And growing up, my dad used to say that the two most powerful words in ministry are "me too." So to be able to look at somebody and say, hey, I get it. I'm there as well. We might be grieving different things, but I think we're all grieving right now. And so I think that's really allowed me to be present with both my players and my students that I work with in counseling.
Thanks. So one more question for you, and then
Yeah.
I'll turn it back to Heather to ask more. How does your knowledge or your education in counseling prepare you to lead your girls, your athletes through this season, for the work with um, your clients as well as your own grief during this time?
Going into that time when my team first moved back home, because of my training as a therapist, and I realized there's a lot of crossover with counseling and coaching. Those two cross over even much more than I originally thought going into it. But I knew one thing that was going to be really important is for our team to stay connected. Whether that felt like something they wanted to do or not, I knew that it was going to be needed just to still be connected to their teammates, to their friends. And so that led to us doing Zoom meetings with each other, where sometimes it was a matter of just checking in and seeing how everybody was doing, sharing prayer requests and praying together. Other times it would be to do something fun, like have a virtual game night. And so just making sure that that time together was intentional felt really important. But also staying connected with each player individually and asking them how they truly are. Not just how are you, I'm good, how are you, but truly how are you doing with all of this. And so being able to stay connected to them individually as well has been really helpful. And we did continue our spring season virtually, which I know sounds a little bit odd, but each week there would be some tasks for them to complete. And yes, that included physical and fundamental, but there was also the counselor in me couldn't help but have a mental/emotional task each week, a relational task, so they're staying connected to people, and a spiritual task, so they're staying connected with God, and that mental emotional piece to really just take care of themselves. And so that was one thing where I, was able to sneak that in there each week with, hey, here are some things for you to do this week that'll really help you stay connected with God, people, and yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelsey. I know you've touched on a little bit, but your personal journey as a counselor, you've experienced loss as well, in going through this, coping and helping your athletes is one thing. How are you personally doing things to help you move through this as well?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So I came up during this quarantine, I realized that I consistently told clients, but also that I would realize something that was helpful for me was connecting with people, getting outside when you can, and exercising or working out. And when I realized that those were the three things that kept coming back, I was like, I need to find an acronym for this. Connection, outside, working out, cow is what I came up with. So those have been three of the things I personally have been focusing on, trying to get outside when it's sunny, trying to exercise, also trying to stay connected as well as I can with people. But journaling has been really helpful for me as well during this time, just to get thoughts and feelings onto paper. To be honest, I think I need to do that even more because I know it's helpful for me, and I sometimes let that be the thing I save for tomorrow. Whereas I do think it's something that would be beneficial for me to consistently do. And then also, I'm thankful that I'm not quarantined alone. I have a wonderful husband, and so being able to spend time together has been really good, whether that's sitting and talking about all the emotions that come with this experience or being able to do something more lighthearted and have fun has been really helpful as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelsey. I'm going to go ahead and transition over to one of our current students as well. Marley, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, where your current path is with Huntington University, and also what are you engaged with in this kind of final part of your time at Huntington University?
Yeah, definitely. So I am in the process of just finishing my master's in counseling. I have my undergraduate degree from Great Lakes Christian College in psychology counseling, and then I'm just finishing up my master's here, and I will be done in 5 weeks. So we are very close. But it's been interesting to me that like my experience as a grad student at Huntington is actually what has like prepared me the best for this COVID-19 world. Since I'm a born and raised Michigander, which is where I am and I live, I've been full-time online since fall of 2018. So Zoom and Moodle, these are like my normal day-to-day experiences for the last 2 years. And so that was kind of this huge unexpected blessing. I just finished a year-long clinical internship at Great Lakes Christian College. And at my internship site, it's a hybrid site, so I did lots of things. I did individual counseling for sure, and I oversaw our peer support counseling, which is our undergraduate students that kind of come alongside other students. And I also had the opportunity to help teach our psychology classes that were offered this year. And so when it came time for Great Lakes to kind of look at what this online education program was going to look like for them, I was kind of able to step out and say like, hey, I've been an online student for 2 years and Huntington has it down to this well-oiled machine, and this is kind of what we do. And we were able to jump right in. And I heard so many times over the last 2-ish months how thankful our students were for my supervisor, who is their main psychology professor, and the way that he handled jumping to that online platform. And so I was just really thankful because it really was totally to do with how tirelessly the people at HU have worked to make our online program as fantastic as it is. The piece that I really love to feel confident in all of that was not only that we had great platforms of Zoom and Moodle, but really that the relationships can be maintained and even built in this online scenario. The cohort that I went through my internship with this last year, some of them I've never even met in person. John is one of them. But he knows me and my experience as this beginning counselor better than most people on this earth. And so my trust in those relationships really helped carry that sense of ease in these last few months, because even though it's different, I know that it could be good. And I felt really thankful for that.
You definitely touched on it a little bit, but what do you think during this, the start of the pandemic to now? You've talked about you've been online, so you've moved through that process a little bit, but what do you think has changed since we're social distancing and doing things different and serving both clients and then working together with colleagues like you're talking about, John?
Yeah, I mean, in short, everything has changed, right? And so as my internship site transitioned to fully online, we kind of talked a little bit about we were able to jump in with our classes, but that meant that I had to transition all of my therapy clients as well. And a kink, I guess, in the teletherapy setting is that you have to use a HIPAA compliant platform. And so, there's these extra hoops that you have to jump through to find something that's going to work. And I felt really thankful. I'm a part of a really good Facebook group made up of LPCs, which is the LMHC license in Michigan. And they were able to kind of jump in as this was happening and recommend a good platform. And so we were able to jump on that. But I had one client drop off who kind of just said like, no, I'm not going to pursue the online platform. And I could see her continuing to struggle. I had her in some classes, and that was difficult as a clinician. But thankfully the rest of my clients did transition over, and we were kind of able to finish out the semester on a stronger note. But it totally changed the tone of our sessions. Anything that we've been working on, that we've been processing through, they were like totally back burner for especially those first few weeks as we navigated what this new quarantine life looked like. And I think especially working with young adults, or emerging adults as we call them in the psychology realm, so many of my clients were just allowing themselves to lose every semblance of structure and schedule in their lives. And I remember one of my clients early on, we were talking about kind of what her new day-to-day looked like. And she was telling me, yeah, I generally go to sleep around 4 a.m. and then I sleep until lunch and, I don't really do anything. And I was like, oh my gosh. So my biggest job as a therapist in those early days especially was to really just do psychoeducation on like why trying to keep a schedule and trying to incorporate those smallest things that feel normal to us is so important. In moments when our lives go spiraling out of control in the way that they have, anything that we can do to incorporate things that feel comfortable and give us that sense of normalcy, they should be protected and they should be carried out like at all costs. If you normally wake up and you listen to music, that's what you should do, even if you're not getting ready to go anywhere. You should keep doing that. If you normally carry around a water bottle, to around your workplace, fill your water bottle and carry it back and forth between your kitchen and your living room and your office. Like, these things allow us to have that tiny sense of normalcy. Mandy kind of touched on it. Getting up and getting dressed every day, that act of taking off our pajamas helps tell our brains like, hey, we are starting the day now. So even if we're changing into leggings and a different t-shirt, it still kind of has that same effect. So, even though our lives are totally different, there's these pieces that we can pull from and incorporate into our new normal that can really help us have that, sense of normalcy there.
You kind of told me a little bit about this next question already, but Marley, as far as what you're learning and reinforcing how to treat and help clients with grief and loss going forward, because you're talking about maintaining structure and patterns, what have you learned a little bit about helping to counsel them online in this environment that you're going to take with you forward?
Yeah, so I am kind of anticipating, obviously, this huge spike in need for mental health services as we move forward. What is happening right now is traumatic, and our brains have just been living through this crisis for months now, which our brains are not made to do. And so, brains in crisis, they have this ability to kind of shut down all of the extra processing components. And then they only have the pieces on in our brains that help us survive a crisis. And so they're made to allow us to escape a house fire or give our neighbor CPR or deliver a baby in an emergency that we haven't made it to the hospital. They're not really made to keep us safe from a superbug for months on end. And that's what we're asking it to do. And so, this has been very traumatic. And so because of that, my ability to work effectively with trauma is going to be really important. And so that's something that I know I have experience in, but also I'm going to have to continue to pursue education in moving forward, and I will do that. But one thing that I'm taking forward specifically is that even though I'm preparing as a therapist to do all of those things, at the core, people really just need to be supported and listened to right now. My clients knew I can't get them out of quarantine. I can't get them out of this space. There was nothing we could do. We could process until the cows came home. There was nothing we could do that could physically change what's happening right now. But me being there for them and being a person that they could count on to shoulder some of that anxiety, it made all the difference. And so we don't have to have a master's degree in counseling to be able to do that for our communities. We can reach out and we can touch base with those that we love. If I've said it once, I've said it 100 times in the last few months. We are all going to have good days and bad days, and that's okay. We have to let ourselves live that experience. On my bad days, I muster through as best as I can. I hug my husband because he's the only person I can touch. And I call my best friend and I say, today is not a good day. And we just work through it. And I kind of know tomorrow will probably not be as hard. And so even though we are not the people that we were at the beginning of 2020, and we can't hold ourselves to those expectations. Our brains are exhausted. Like I said, we're exhausted. And so we're all just doing the best we can. And we have to give ourselves grace to make it through this.
That's very good point, Marley. As you finish this last 5 weeks, which we're all cheering you on as you've continued, this is our opportunity to say so right here. What have you, I know Kelsey touched on how she's helping students go through, how are you as a student processing that loss through graduations and things like that, that personal experience for you?
Yeah, for myself, I think that God has really placed the virtues of gratitude and thankfulness on my heart. And so even though there are really hard moments, I have been trying really hard to meditate on those virtues. You know, like many people here and in the world, obviously my graduation has been postponed. And I had to finish an internship virtually. And so there was no like end to it. There was nothing we could do to kind of say, this is a chapter closing. And so that was really weird. My best friend had to postpone her wedding. And so those types of things are just happening, you know, all throughout. So one thing that I had to do was just throw out of my vocabulary of the notion of something being fair or not. For one, what does that even mean? And for two, I just kind of found that we're all losing out on these moments and experiences. So kind of dwelling on how unfair it feels only caused me frustration and sadness. But this is not me saying that we shouldn't acknowledge the losses, because we have to acknowledge them. And so if you need to cry, if you need to scream, if you need to have a really unproductive day, let yourself do that. And that's what I have been doing. It's imperative. But then once we get through that moment, you know, maybe try to find a way to celebrate or cheer yourself up. So my best friend that had to postpone her wedding on what would have been her wedding day, they drove to Grand Rapids and got carry out dinner and sat in their car and watched The Office and, you know, watched a couple people that were walking around, and my best friend got to see a dog, and you know, it made her very happy. And so even though it was a really different day than what they had planned for and they had hoped, they made this memory that they'll be able to carry throughout. And they, you know, they can kind of always maybe do that again on all of those April 24ths for them, because that won't be their wedding day going forward, but it will be this memory that they got to make. I recently got a card in the mail that was made out to Master Marley Teachworth, since I'm finishing my master's, and I've left it unopened and I put it right on my fridge, and we don't have anything on the front of our fridge, and so it's this only thing that's on the front of my fridge, just so that I could see it and it could kind of cheer me on in these last few weeks. And it's helped me feel really seen and celebrated, even though I can't be with my friend that sent it to me. So, you know, we're all making the sacrifices during this time, but it doesn't mean that we can't make our own moments of happiness and joy. So even if they don't look the way that we thought, they can be beautiful in their own way. You know, send that graduation card, help put on the socially distant drive-by birthday celebration, you know, offer that kind word and that listening ear. It goes so far. We're all in this together, and if we're creative, we can make these moments of celebration in new and different ways. So focusing on that like level of thankfulness and gratitude has really helped me navigate all of, you know, my losses that I just talked about during this time.
I appreciate that, Marley. And just so you know, you're seen and celebrated right here. We're so glad you shared your personal story as well, okay? John, I'm going to go ahead and ask a few questions of you. We'll get to know you a little bit better here. John, could you just share a little bit more about yourself, your experience in the graduate program here at Huntington University?
Sure. My name's John Lizey, and I'm from South Fort Wayne around Adams County. So Chris out there, I'm from his neck of the woods. But I've been in ministry most of my life and also done some mission work. So I was in South Asia where Mandy was, and then also in the Caribbean. I have 4 teenage daughters, actually one's in her 20s now. So third culture kids as well. They've experienced a lot of the things that Mandy talked about. And involved in ministry and missions, I would spend a lot of time talking with people and interacting and wanting to like enter into their, whether it was grief or just heartache or failure, any kind of, you know, challenges that life would throw at you. I wanted to walk with them and even figure out how to help them change, but a lot of times didn't feel like I had the tools to do that, and kind of bumped my head against that for 20 years in different ways. And that's what really kind of pushed me to go back to school for the counseling degree. And the Huntington program, I actually started when I was in the Dominican Republic on the mission field. So the online program allowed me to do that in a way that I just would have not been possible prior to that. So I'm just finishing that as well with Marley. I have two more, one class I'm in now and then one more. So I'm done in mid-August. So a few more than 5 weeks, but also counting down the days when I get to celebrate as well. So.
Excellent. I appreciate that, John. The experiences that you've had, you shared a little bit about your personal experience as well. Could you tell us how you're coping with that grief and loss and moving through as a parent, and then also, you know, someone that's facing some next hurdles and finishing your degree and then moving into the next step in your career?
Yeah, it's well, like what Marley shared, there's a lot of gratitude for me, partly because all this lockdown has created more space and time to focus and get done with school, where, you know, having a full-time job and 4 kids and a commute and then a master's program was really kind of stretching me to the end of myself often. And I've really been given back, you know, lots of time. So I've been grateful for that. It's kind of felt like a gift. On the other side, there's definitely been, you know, the need or the feeling, what Mandy had on her slides, but how am I going to provide for my family? You know, we're quite a crew, and the grocery bill, they're all home now. You know, I got the water bill last week, and it was like $80 more than the month before because everybody's home, and you know, everything is just, we're all kind of stuck in the house together. So that's been very real. And then the other reality for me is that my wife's an RN, and 3 of my 4 daughters work in the healthcare world as well. So 4 out of the 5 women I live with are all serving in nursing homes and hospitals or physical therapy clinics. So just the reality of they're at a higher risk, not because they have medical conditions, but just because they're pretty consistently exposed, or at least potentially exposed in that environment. So that's kind of weighed on me. Not that I can do a lot about it, but definitely feel myself kind of wrestling through that. I'm definitely not isolated, you know, in that there's always people around me. I'm more of an introvert, so I like to go outside. Like Kelsey, I liked your cow illustration, so that's definitely me. I'll go outside with the dog. He's the other male in my house, and we'll just go walk and not say a word to each other. So that's kind of how I handle it.
That's good. You kind of pointed out, you know, all of you have shared a little bit of a personal impact, and it also tells us a lot about counselors and people in mental health fields, and reminds us that we're all human, right? We're all dealing with these and responding. John, how does that level of understanding and empathy and compassion play a role in how you see clients in the future and now?
That's probably the biggest takeaway from my time at Huntington. Is, you know, in ministry and missions, the focus is always on knowing God more, which is certainly valid and important, but tends to be ignored more about knowing yourself. And when you get into a counseling program, there's a lot of focus on really facing, you know, yourself, the good, bad, and the ugly. And what I didn't really realize is that by knowing myself, I can actually know God more, because God meets us where we are in the truth, and not in what we think we should be or where we want to be. So over these last 3 years of, you know, a lot of introspection and hanging around with other, you know, people like Mandy and other therapists, like, I kind of feel like I've been peeled back and laid open. And while that can be painful and sometimes something I want to avoid, it's really given me some tools now, as, you know, I'm with clients or with my family or even just with myself, to be able to have more of an understanding of what's going on in me, as I'm finding it's serving me well. And if nothing else, of this past 3 years has made that journey worthwhile.
That makes sense, John, to talk about, that process and moving through, and then that vulnerability that you experienced in the program to help you grow. Is there something that you've experienced in this last change from the time the pandemic kind of started to now that you would say you'll take forward in that change, using it in your life? You've talked a lot about how it's impacted your empathy and compassion, but what are the things you're going to implement in the future?
And probably what I'm seeing out of my clients, as we've shifted online, and now we're kind of starting to shift back, but I've always kind of known that loneliness is out there, and especially, with emerging adults, Marley, as you call them, like they're more digitally connected than ever, but I've seen a huge rise in just loneliness to the point where it's crushing a lot of people, and they tend to be younger. That's a stereotype. That's not always true, but several of my clients have been relapsing, and they're so lonely and so isolated. And that was happening before, but the pandemic, I think, has multiplied that in a way. And to be able to try and enter that space even virtually is harder. I mean, it's not impossible, but sometimes harder. So I think I'm more aware of the loneliness that's around me in my world in a different way that I wasn't before, and still trying to figure out how to navigate all that, both personally and as well as with my clients. But it's very real and sets people up for addictions and things that can be very destructive.
Absolutely. John, you've touched on some things that we're going to continue this conversation in the community with Huntington and this networking that we've developed here, grief and loss, that loneliness that people are experiencing. And Marley, I think you've said too, clinicians and mental health counselors are going to be in great demand as this continues, because we're just experiencing things we need to learn how to work through together. Mandy, as we kind of wrap up here, as we get close to our end time, what are some final thoughts or points you would like to make after you've heard our alumna and our students talk about their experience here?
I think it's a great example of, much like riding in an airplane, when we used to be able to do that, when the flight attendants would kind of give that instruction of, if something happens and the oxygen masks drop, what do you need to do first? You need to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. And as I've listened to our three colleagues share, it sounds like there is that self-care practice being put in place to be able to have the bandwidth to address and work through and lament personal grief that is, a result of kind of our pandemic, as well as sit with others. And I think, if anything, that is a lifelong practice that will just touch many and be a help along the way. And so I'm encouraged by what you've shared, and I will also practice the cow in the days ahead.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to kind of finalize our thoughts today. I want to let everybody know we really appreciate your time. This has been great to come together to talk about a very important topic. Huntington University will be sending anyone that is interested a link, and it will also be available for those who are interested through our YouTube channel. You can reach us at graduate@huntington.edu, or anyone else can reach us there if you'd like more information. As you've watched this, if you feel like you would like to reach out to connect with faculty, you can let us know. You can reach out and talk to us a little bit more. And if anybody's experiencing that loneliness that John talked about, or needs some help with grief and loss, feel free to reach out, and our faculty will help get you to where you need to go as well. So once again, I'll let everybody, if you'd like to say goodbye, open your mics and say goodbye to everybody. And thank you again for being with us today. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you all.